Hi, welcome everyone. We are talking today about inheritance gone right. Basically, what we mean by that is how do we set up our lives, our affairs, the practical nature of inheritance and finances so that we can maintain relationships and be a gift to future generations and be a gift to the people that are coming behind us. This is such a relevant conversation in midlife because not only are we thinking about estate planning and wealth transfer for ourselves, but we're also thinking about it in terms of our parents because they're getting older. And so today we brought the experts on, and we are so excited to invite Sean and Jill Maher into the conversation today. They are actually longtime friends of mine. Jill and I met when we were studying abroad in Switzerland back in college and had an immediate connection. And then through the years, I've gotten to know Sean and then their children. And it has been truly one of the most blessed relationships that I've had in my life. And so I could cry just talking about them because I love them so much. And they're so important to me on many levels. But I think as we're looking at this conversation today, the reason I want to bring up who they are first is because of their character. Their character informs this conversation. Who they are and how they have managed themselves in the world speaks for itself. Sean, he is a principal at Valley Forge Financial Group and the CEO of the Valley Forge Family Office. And he regularly presents to industry groups on complex estate planning concepts. He has held board positions with multiple charities. He's published articles for Trust and Estates, Journal of Financial Planning, and National Underwriter. He created the Valley Forge Practicum, which my son got to participate in last summer. My youngest got to be a part of this practicum, which is unbelievable that they offer this for young people who want to get into the financial industry. It's a free summer seminar for high school and college age students interested in a career in financial services. And I can't tell you how much Stetson learned. So that was incredible. And then Jill, she is a licensed psychological counselor and serves clients at the Peacemaker Center, a not-for-profit mental health counseling provider. And she has been a voice in their new book of the counseling side and more of the deeper issues that are going on with relationships and money. And that is one of the things that I find so incredible about their new book, which I don't think we've said the title yet, but it's called The Greatest Gift. And I just think that is so important that not only are we talking about the practical nature of wealth transfer and inheritance and those kinds of issues and wills, estate planning, but then you've got Jill talking about the deeper issues that are going on, the undercurrents and the emotional side. And so that's where I just think this book is absolutely brilliant. And I'm giving it as gifts to so many people in my life. Jill and Sean, they have been married for almost 30 years and they have 3 adult children. They're college sweethearts, having met in cooking class at Cornell's School of Hotel Administration. And they now live in Pennsylvania. So welcome to the podcast, Sean and Jill.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was such a nice intro.
Great intro. Yes, thank you.
Well, Sean, you say in one section of the book that all families have battles, help yours avoid a war. And I just love that so much because this conversation really is for everyone, whether we're dealing with a small amount of money or a very large amount of money. Money is complicated. And so after so many years of working with countless families, why does wealth transfer, in your view, create wars?
Well, first of all, can I just say, Krista and Alex, we are huge fans of Our Time to Rise. So congratulations to you all for creating this platform. And we're honored to be here today.
Such a privilege.
And thank you for your question. You mentioned the word complicated. It's very complicated. So for us to say battles turn into wars for one reason, it would be probably an oversimplification. But lack of transparency jumps out at me as one of the first reasons that, little skirmishes turn into a war. And in the book, we talk about the weaponizing phrase, mom would have wanted.
Yeah.
Or dad would have wanted. And that to me is the one thing that over and over I see. And it's because parents are not communicating what they want while they're alive. And so the surprise element often of inheritance is what's creating the conflict. People are dropped with a lot of assets, a lot of information that they weren't prepared for. And so inevitably, not always, but a lot of times it turns into battles, and hopefully it doesn't, but often it ends up in war.
Mhm.
And you say at the beginning of your book that this is true no matter the dollar amount, the
Right.
emotional part that's connected to it, and even the practical approaches that we're going to talk about. It really doesn't matter what tax bracket you're in.
Right.
The heart matters are the same, and the practical approaches may be very similar. But I can say from firsthand experience, I have watched friends who have had parents pass away, and parents have either set things up well or they haven't. And when it's been clear, we say often clear is kind. When it's been clear, it has been helpful, even if it's been a little bit painful at the beginning.
Yeah, that is absolutely true.
One of our favorite phrases that I think we learned from you all. Clear is kind. Love that. So true.
Dawn, you've been working in this industry for so many years, and you've seen countless families navigate this.
Right.
Can you speak a little bit to that? And Jill, jump in on your professional knowledge of this and what's going on behind the scenes. Part of what I just heard you say is that there's a lack of clarity. And so people are often surprised. But I also see, at least in my observations, is that people associate love with what's happening on the other side of the estate planning. That there is somehow a direct correlation between how much a parent loves someone based on what's happening on the other side of that will or what it says. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. And it doesn't have to be assets that is the outward expression of love. It could be the choice of who is a trustee in a will, who's responsible for administering the will. All of those things, unfortunately, are often not talked about. And so when death occurs, not only the assets, but also the roles are thrust upon people. They're just not prepared for it. And so, again, regardless of whether it's inheriting $100,000 or $100 million, the themes are consistent.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm going to chime in here that you mentioned love, where there's love and there's loss, there's grief. So really, in the context of our discussion here, what I think is under it all is grief. It's a response to loss. And grief will attach to things. It finds its way out. So what I mean by that, I'll give you an example. So COVID, I would say during COVID, this whole thing with the mask, I'm like, it's not about the mask. This is about loss of safety, predictability, loss of rituals, loss of connection. We were grieving so much in COVID. And if you think about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, which we know they're not linear, you don't necessarily hit all of them. You can jump back and forth between the stages of sadness, anger, denial, bargaining, and then finally acceptance, which I prefer to call integration. But so if you're talking about the mask in COVID, think about how that plays out in those stages of grief in the bargaining or in the anger. So it will attach to things. And so when we lose someone and there's death and wealth transfer, it will naturally attach to whatever the platform is, which is the estate settlement. And it becomes an outlet of sorts. Yeah.
Or grandma's wedding ring, or grandma's Bible, or mom's, special bowl or dishes. Or I think of that too, that all of a sudden now that represents that, what you were just referring to, it represents the love or that person. And so then the grief responds to that object that represents them. And now there's fighting.
100%. Actually, the original title of the book that we talked about was The Intersection Between Grief and Greed.
Mm.
So here we're going through major loss, dysregulation, system shift in the family. We're involving money, which has such complicated meaning in our lives. And so it plays out in that ball field.
Yeah, the outward manifestation is it looks like greed. If we're observing it happening, it's easy to say, oh, they're greedy, that's why they're fighting. But what we've discovered is they're
grieving.
A lot more. There are a lot of other emotions happening underneath, and that's really the framework for the book. Is if there's a negative emotion. Sorry, Jill doesn't like me to call any emotion negative. All emotions are welcome.
Emotions have value.
If there's an unproductive or disconnecting emotion, can we encourage a positive emotion that might counteract it?
Adaptive. There we go. An adaptive expression of the emotion.
So can you give an example of that, of what that might look like?
So one of the first principles of the book is develop a common purpose. And so develop a common purpose is working together as a family for maybe a family investment partnership or giving to charity. You can just think of countless ways that families can develop a common purpose. The whole reason for that is to create connection. And so where there's connection, we view that as armor, preemptive armor for jealousy. Without connection, it's easy for people to be jealous of one another over grandma's ring or that vase or that rug or whatever. And so developing a common purpose, and we give examples of where it has worked positively and, to really create that connection.
Another way of looking at how connection offsets envy or jealousy. Think about when you view something on Instagram versus if someone sent you a text directly saying, I'm so excited, I just got a promotion, or check out the pictures to the great vacation I just took. There's connection first. So you experience it with them, and it helps offset any kind of natural and normal envy to someone else receiving something. So that's kind of what's happening there, is you're creating a foundation for connection with the family. So then when one is getting this or another is getting that, we don't have that. It helps offset it.
Yeah, it's never perfect. It's very complicated. Disclaimer. But it's just part of one of the tools.
I love that as a tool. And Jill, I just think that is such a great way to say it. It's something we all can easily relate to. And that's just on a bigger scale. But Sean, will you talk about what your family did?
Sure. So my uncle started our company, and along with my brother and my two cousins, his two daughters, and my aunt, the six of us really formed an investment partnership 25 years ago. And my uncle, unfortunately, he's been gone 12 years, but I don't even know if this was his purpose. But putting us all together and creating this common purpose around the investment partnership really became the platform for relationship. These are my two cousins that were inheritors of portions of the business when he died. And when Mike and I approached them to purchase their interest in the company, because they're not active in the company, I really reflect back and say, well, why wasn't this a controversial approach or controversial event in all of our lives? These are moments when families get ripped apart.
That's right.
And what I come back and reflect on is that it's because of that common purpose, because we have relationship with one another, that it didn't get controversial or it didn't turn into a fight. We were all interested in a peaceful transition, and we led with that. The investment part is great. Don't get me wrong. We love getting together and talking about investments, and that portfolio has grown, and it's been a great event for all of us. But I don't know if my uncle really realized when he started it what great connection it was going to create.
I was going to say, and it wasn't an easy, even so, that transition. It was still emotional and really difficult.
Yeah.
But it allowed for them to remain connected through that difficulty. It kept the relationship.
And Jill talks all the time about practicing the hard conversation. You're athletes. You've talked about it in prior episodes. Think about, practice in sports. This is just another form of practice. we've been negotiating with each other for 20 plus years about, should we buy this stock? No. Okay. Well, we disagree and we fight through, we create compromise. That's all been practiced for that big event. And we didn't know it at the time. It wasn't purposeful for that outcome, but I really do reflect that was very helpful in the transition. And we still have the investment partnership together. We still have that connection, and it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I love in the book you talk about how you each took different roles, that you didn't all have the same strengths. So speak to that a little bit.
Right. So I love analysis. Jill will tell you everything that you can possibly put into Excel, I do. So vacation planning is on Excel. So I love the analytical part. So if you give me a stock, I would love to research it. My oldest cousin is a veterinarian. And so she has a very clear understanding of pharmaceuticals and what's involved. And so, she's our science expert, if you will. She takes on the role whenever we have a pharmaceutical stock on the board to talk about. My brother Mike is our secretary. He's our president, vice president, secretary, and chief note taker. But he keeps us all together. He organizes the meetings.
He's a natural leader.
Yeah. My cousin Kathleen, my younger cousin, is our idea generator. She has all the creative ideas. She's plugged into all the new trends. So, and then my aunt, who's still very involved, is the ethics police. Mm-hmm. She says, what do we know about the ethics of the company? We can rely on her to bring us back to center. What is their track record on ethics and accountability? And so those are roles that weren't given to us, but over time, we've all fit into those roles and respect each other's strengths as a result.
Have you named them?
In the book, we name them, but we don't have official titles.
I encourage that, if that's possible.
To name. Yeah. Can you give some other examples of how families might practice those hard conversations? Maybe they're just managing their parents' property, or they're trying to make some decisions together as a family. How have you seen that play out in different ways?
I have a great example. I think, unfortunately, a lot of families we see bond when mom and dad are ill. Mm-hmm. And so it's a conversation that's thrust on families, but it certainly can serve that purpose, especially if there's a prolonged illness. So that's unfortunately a common purpose, maybe not the most ideal, but it is starting the compromise and the hard conversations to be had.
I'd say the family meeting, whether it's formal or informal, mm-hmm. whether led by an advisor or done just informally at home together, having that family meeting that Sean outlines in the book of components and how to begin approaching some of these conversations. You don't need a financial expert to do those kind of things, to begin saying, what are everybody's ideas of what it will look like with the vacation home? Mm-hmm. After we're gone. And while mom and dad are still alive is the key. While they're around the table to kind of lead, diffuse, regulate those conversations.
Yeah, I see a lot of that where the parents get tired and they no longer want to be a part of the conversation, or mm-hmm. maybe in some mm-hmm. cases they're not able to anymore because of maybe a mental state or whatever's happened. But I do see also that they kind of say, well, I've done my part up till now, and now I'm kind of washing my hands of this, and you need to figure it out. What do you say to that?
It's a bit of a cop-out, unfortunately. I can't tell you how many times I've heard clients say, it won't be my problem. I will be dead.
Right. This is exactly what I'm saying.
They're not going to be here. They're not going to witness it. And so I have seen that attitude quite often, including people that say, I don't even want to write a will. They'll figure it out. And it's somewhat irresponsible in the most extreme. I would say, in addition, Krista, it's not only just being exhausted emotionally and just physically as we age, but also the idea that it may create conflict. Mm-hmm. I'm a conflict avoidant person. Jill has taught me that. But, tearing off the Band-Aid and having that hard conversation will protect your heirs. To have the hard conversation and you be taking the blame or taking some of the
responsibility.
the responsibility. It allows your children to have a relationship with each other rather than fight over something that you could have discussed while you were living.
That's why it's called a gift. This is a gift that you're giving to your heirs. The gift of communication, of setting them up for relational success with their siblings and with who you're passing it on to. So, and I would encourage, if the parents are really that checked out and they're in which by the way, I can't help but think of like integrity versus despair, the last stage of Erickson's development. If they're in despair and they're not in a place of integrity with their life and there's a little bit of denial going on with things, then I would encourage the next generation to feel empowered to say, we're going to do this, and for them to lead in some of those discussions if they can.
Yeah, the first stage when Jill and I are doing family meetings and facilitating family meetings with families is we've just established setting values is the most important thing. That's the foundation. And there are great exercises that we take families through, and we're not the only ones that do that, by the way. There are tons of resources out there, and to do a quick plug for the Purposeful Planning Institute. And I can give you all their information to put in the program notes, but there are advisors and facilitators throughout the country that will help families with this. So when we talk about values, we're talking about nothing about money, no money values, personal values. Here's how I view the world. Here's how we view the world as a family. And ideally, it's parents and children and maybe even grandchildren around the table. But to Jill's point, if parents are not there to do it, it would not be a problem for children to organize it and have that conversation.
Sure.
Well, and I was delighted, actually, Sean, to see your name in the Wall Street Journal recently, where it was an article about Warren Buffett. And I think the title of the article was something like, Warren Buffett talks to his kids about his will. You should too. And I love that you were quoted in that and that the book was mentioned.
I'm still floored by the whole thing. Okay. Like Warren Buffett is they call him the Oracle of Omaha for a reason. Okay. He is a wise person when it comes to investing, but I've really been impressed with his end of life planning and the communication that he is providing his children. There won't be any surprises when he dies. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And I mean, what a platform with which to launch your book, Jill and Sean. I would just say that was pretty amazing. But Jill, I also want you to talk about, there's a tool you bring up in the beginning, and I love it so much. And I want you to teach it to people because I think it's a game changer when it comes to conflict. So can you talk about that tool?
Is that the I feel I need tool? Is that the one? And I love that you love it. It really is. So much. It's so effective and it's so simple, but I will say it is so hard to do at times. So let me just put that out there. I don't feel like you're being preached to, people. This is hard, but it's so simple. So I'm just going to use an example. I'm going to paint a picture for you. Let's just say you've been preparing for the Thanksgiving meal. So you spent days preparing and mapping out things. And the day of Thanksgiving, you're chopping and dicing and cooking and stirring and whisking and all that good stuff all day long. You're on your feet, working your butt off.
Speaking for a friend here.
Speaking for a friend. And you produce this incredible meal and everybody sits down and is so enjoying it, loves the food. You're all connecting. Everybody's feeling really good. And then after the long, nice, filling meal, the kids are excited and they're like, let's keep the party going. Let's go to the living room and let's play a game. And they run off excited to pick which game, and they're getting it out and getting it set up. And you find yourself all of a sudden alone in the kitchen with all these dishes and cleanup. So let's see 2 different ways we could approach this. Turn to everybody in the living room and really with a not so nice tone say, you guys always leave me with the mess. No one ever helps me clean up. This stinks, and just
Martyr.
kind of going.
You just turn into the martyr.
Exactly. Exactly. And you're leading with you statements, and your children are feeling criticized, and your husband who joined them. They're feeling quite criticized, and you're not going to get the response you're hoping for with that. So let's just use the I feel I need formula for this. And you turn to them and said, I feel exhausted. I feel unappreciated right now. I need some help in the kitchen, guys.
Yes.
What a different response you're going to get. And it's because you're avoiding that pitfall of feeling criticized. Nobody likes to be criticized. It creates other responses. And actually, John Gottman, one of my favorite psychologists, he's a professor and he's a relationship expert. And he talks about 4 communication patterns that, when they show up regularly, are the predictor of relationship failure. And he dramatically terms these 4 patterns the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And the first one being criticism. And it naturally falls that if there's criticism, then the other 3 kind of show up right on their heels, which is defensiveness. You're going to get defensive stonewalling and contempt. So just focusing on the criticism piece, this I feel I need, can really diffuse that pattern, that communication pattern, and help you, express you're taking responsibility with the I for the feeling versus shaming and blaming someone else for a feeling with the you. And I think that the second half of this is so important. The I need, you're empowering the other person how to support you in the feeling. And this could be with conflict, or this could just be in high stakes conversations, like about money. I'm feeling, and this is what I need. Sometimes it's as simple as, I just need to be heard. I need to finish this thought. Or it can be concrete. I need you to get in the kitchen and help me wash these dishes. And there's something also under this that I really like about this that's kind of deeper and a little more nuanced that I think's happening here. When you name a feeling, you claim it. And when you claim and name something, you can separate from it a bit. And by naming it, you're giving permission for it. You're giving space for it. And so it's not all of you. It won't hijack your lens. So just going back to that example, a part of me, I'm feeling unappreciated or exhausted in that moment, but I'm also really feeling connected to my family and excited about going to play a game with them. Those 2 things can coexist at the same time. And when we make room for both of them, then it won't hijack the whole lens that you have in that moment on your family. So yeah, I agree. Game changer.
And I'm thinking that there's potentially a third response too, which is the stuffing and not saying anything and the resenting. I mean, you may be feeling all those things that you could go spew in the living room, but instead you're just in there cleaning and upset that you're cleaning. But that tool of saying, I feel I need, gives you permission to say, for maybe that conflict avoidant person, to say something in a way that doesn't feel like you're creating conflict, but you are naming what you feel and what you need. And so I think it speaks to people on that other end of the spectrum too, that maybe just would go in and clean it up and not say anything.
100%.
And imagine that. Let's shift the example to inheritance. I mean, cleaning the dishes, I would say, is a lower, I won't say low, but lower stake problem.
Right.
If you're bottling up and not speaking over inheritance, you're probably speaking to your spouse about it or a friend about it, and it's just amping everything up. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
And you're not separating from it. So it's going to dominate your entire lens.
Right.
When you bottle something up, then it's repression. It's classic Freudian repression. It's going to then pop out in some way, shape, or form, and it's going to disconnect you from those around you. That's really the goal of all of this, is just to maintain connection.
Yeah, I think about how when we think somehow that making something a big deal or including conversation is going to create more conflict. But what I hear you saying is the exact opposite, that if
Mhm.
there is open communication, that going back to what you said in the very beginning, Sean, transparency, if there's transparency from the very beginning and communication around that, that diffuses so much. But it's
Mhm.
when there's kind of this secretive nature and around it that trust feels fragile, at least in that arena. And that can be so hard. And I was also thinking, as you were talking, Jill, we're not mind readers. We don't know what's important to people. So
Mhm.
even like, let's say around an estate planning situation, for someone to say, I feel this and I need this, most of the table probably won't know that. I mean, it's such a simple example, but my daughter, she's a teacher, and she just had the other day this student just come unglued, and he said, I'm never going to be in the newsletter. And she thought he never wanted to be in the news. He doesn't want his picture taken. And all of a sudden he storms out of the classroom because he's not in the newsletter. And she's like, I had no idea. Let's just take that to a grander scale and
Yeah.
say,
Mhm.
you know, how is someone supposed to know what you need if you never
Absolutely.
say it? But we do have the responsibility of setting that up for that opportunity to happen, because it's very easy for that never to happen because there's not a family meeting. I love, Sean and Jill, you meet with families. I think it's brilliant that you're both involved. This is like power team right here. But that you actually facilitate those conversations. So one of my questions for you is, how do people overcome that uncomfortable feeling of setting that up and then modeling some of these tools?
Right. Well, and we mentioned a family meeting we had last year with our family, which I think is a great example because it's probably the third or fourth that we formally said to the kids, we're meeting as a family, not around the dinner table, not standing around, just chit-chatting. We are going to a conference room and we're going to have a family meeting.
Wow.
And the first time years ago was, well, what's this about? There's a lot of anxiety. I was really surprised last year that they were like, who's sick? What's the bad news that's going to happen? There's just anxiety naturally of why are we doing this? I would prepare folks to say, if you ask and the first time you get a little bit of pushback, it's just fear. It's just natural anxiety that people are going to have. But overcoming it is really, I would just say, know what lies ahead if you don't do it. You have to do it. It's such a high stakes problem if you don't, that enough should be motivation. And we talk about different strategies, but making it easy for the people to attend, work around their schedule it far enough in advance that it gets on the calendar and it's a firm date. If you have children or heirs traveling from out of state, pay for it
If you can.
Make
it easy.
Yeah, make it easy for them. Make it so that the hardest thing for them to do is to get up, comb their hair, and brush their teeth and show up. You don't want to have anything standing in the way.
And we're also all for like incentives, like take them out to dinner after. Do something fun as a family after, as that incentive. But honestly, at least based on what we've seen personally as well as professionally, people love it.
Yes.
I have never seen a family walk away from one of these meetings and said, well, that sucked or that was really hard. Like, people really enjoy, it feels good to be heard and connect and to dispel some of this ambiguity around these topics. So it didn't take much convincing to make it happen again. They were excited about it.
And I would say I do face challenge from entrepreneurs and business owners who say, I'm doing my part. I'm creating the wealth. This is not my job. And I think about our meeting a couple months ago. Very hard charging businessman has created an amazing company. And surprisingly, he was willing to do it. And as soon as he said yes, everyone said, okay, what's the date? As soon as he said yes, and we sent out the email to the family, the dates started flying and getting the meeting on the calendar was easy. Sometimes it's just convincing the stubborn party to say, yes, this is important to all of us. Let's get this done. Let's get this date on the calendar.
Well, and can I add to that? Because I see that in just people I'm around and their families. It's also divorce. When there's someone, when there is a remarriage, and so now you've got two sets of families that are potentially heirs, and yet the one feels entitled because it's their biological father or mother, but then they have become family with their step family, but the children don't feel like they should be able to have the same access, and yet that maybe that person does, and so they just don't call the meeting because they're avoiding it and they don't want to face that. So, and they don't want to face that anger. So how do you navigate those dynamics?
That's a great question. I would even add on the other nuance that we've observed is in-laws. When do you invite in-laws around the table? I love my mom's perspective on this. She's a fan of the book. She better be, right? but she shared with me a very personal story where she was not invited. It wasn't a formal family meeting in the context like we're talking about here. There was a meeting of my dad and his sisters, and my mom wasn't asked to join. And she said, that hurt. That really hurt me. And, so every family is different in terms of when they do it. We've invited our future daughter-in-law to the most recent family meeting, and I thought it was beautiful. And hopefully she knows she belongs in our family. It's not just about bloodline.
Create safety. No, but to answer your question, I mean, carefully, how do you navigate that? Very carefully. I mean, it's a difficult situation to begin with. And so you're just trying to support as best you can what is a difficult family system and situation that's just going to get more charged with death and loss than your traditional, simpler family system. So all the more important to do it, but sure, all the more uncomfortable. So if you can get, a counselor, a therapist, somebody, and the reason why I would recommend that, and I mean, an hourly rate or coach somebody to help you walk through this. The hourly rates are not crazy. I think it's doable for a lot of families just to have someone come in and do that for you. Why? Because they don't have any stakes in the game. They have nothing invested there. So they can remain regulated. They can help guide the conversation, lead with curiosity. So it just creates that regulating force in the room. So I highly recommend, especially in tricky situations like that.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to dodge the question on divorce. The one thing I will say about family meetings is they force everyone to be prepared. So particularly in a divorce situation, the patriarch and matriarch, if they haven't figured out what they're going to do with their assets, they probably can't have a family meeting. So by scheduling the family meeting, it forces them to address the issue. And so, again, as Jill said, if you're not addressing the problem now, it only gets bigger and conflict will ensue after mom and dad are gone or mom and stepdad or whatever.
And I can just give a positive story on that, in that my mom married a widower who was very clear when they got married. He had 4 children from his first marriage. Like, he just was very clear when they got married. And I was thinking, this is weird that he's talking about money so much. And yet he passed away and there were no questions. And we could just all grieve together. It was the greatest gift.
Alex. Wow.
Yeah, but I think it can work. He took the initiative. And I think where I see families really struggle is when parents don't take the initiative. So how can you touched a little bit on sometimes the children then just have to take over, which I think sometimes people do. And sometimes it gets icky. How can a group of adults, say they're in midlife, whose parents either have passed or they're no longer able or willing, besides the family meeting, how can they decide together as a group, we want to do this well, and we don't want this to tear us apart as siblings and in-laws and maybe step-siblings, whatever the group is? How can a group move forward together?
I love that question. And I just want to acknowledge what you were saying. And I just want to applaud your stepfather for the courage that took. That was a weird conversation to come into, talking about money. And we don't do money well as a society. We're very strangely protective and secretive and all that about it. So good for him. How do you do it? I mean, if one person has the desire, I would suggest just begin with simply collecting information together. What do we all know? What is clear right now? What is the picture right now? Just starting to gather that information. Because once you can at least start there and putting it on the table of this is what we know exists in terms of wills and, what's been bequested to whom, then we can start to talk about it if the parents aren't going to get involved. And how do you feel? And then lead with curiosity is my favorite statement. Can we get curious with each other once we have the information as siblings or whoever the group is you're talking about? Can they then lead with curiosity with each other as to how they feel about the situation as it is now? What are their hopes about it? What are their concerns about it? All those kind of questions. And whether you do it in person or, virtually, just start communicating.
And the other thing that one of the principles in the book is forge traditions. Krista, I love your book, by the way. Still a huge fan all these years later. It's an incredible document and resource for families. And if traditions, holiday traditions, gatherings, I mean, these family meetings sound so overbearing and formal. Just creating a tradition around either a holiday, 4th of July, family gatherings. We have so many holidays in this country. Find an annual tradition to create. And if conversation happens around inheritance, fine. But again, that connection, the intentionality, Jill talks a lot about that, and the practice is just invaluable.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, go buy the greatest gift and hand it to every single person in the family and say, will you commit to at least reading some of this? And then let's talk afterwards. Like almost use it as a book study. And that inevitably will lead to conversation. Okay, well, this is incredible. This is part 1 of 2 parts to this conversation. So if you are loving this content, then tune in next week because we are going to have part 2 where we dive further into how we can do this whole money inheritance situation well. So Sean and Jill, thanks for being here. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.